Thank you all for being here. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the Coalition for Civil Freedoms Annual Family Conference. Thank you so much to Mel for the introduction. And I just wanted to take a couple of minutes, or a few seconds really, but because we're running sort of late on time, but I just wanted to acknowledge the work that the organizers of this conference have put into organizing this. Mel Underbucky, Laila Al-Arian, Hatem Fariz, Tara Saadudin, everybody, Mariam Abu Ali, everybody who's volunteered their time to make this possible. Welcome to all the families, some of whom traveled from very far to be here. So the title of today's event is Caged and Forgotten, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about our experience. Not only am I a journalist, but I'm the daughter of Dr. Ahmed Bedier, a Palestinian political prisoner who was arrested more than 15 years ago in the wake of 9/11 on trumped-up charges based on his activism on the behalf of Palestinians and for Palestinian human rights. Even though it's been 15 years, we haven't forgotten what it's like to have been through that experience. And we felt forgotten from the very beginning. One of the most distinct memories I have, I believe it was Maya Angelou who said, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And that's very true when it comes to our experience. We will never forget, even though as the time goes on, we may forget some details of the experience, maybe some facts about the trial, but what we won't forget is how we felt during that time. At the very beginning, one of the things we felt is we realized the phone stopped ringing, we stopped hearing from friends. My mother would go to the grocery store and people she knew for years would turn their backs pretending they didn't see her. My father founded an Islamic school, and people at the school told my mom not to bring my siblings back because they were so afraid. The FBI had been visiting families to ask them about my father, to intimidate them. But when our old friends in our community was afraid, we found friends and people who really stepped in. People like Dr. Mel Underbucky, who's in the audience, who wrote a letter to the local newspaper defending my father's rights to speak out. And my mother got in touch with her, and Mel became one of the staunchest supporters, organizing an entire campaign and holding weekly rallies in front of the courthouse where my father and his 3 co-defendants, one of whom is in this audience, were put on trial. And the jury was able to see people who looked just like them holding signs that say charity to orphans and widows is not a crime. And I have no doubt in my mind that that act of courage and solidarity made a huge difference in the outcome of the trial. So even though some of you may feel forgotten, know that you are not forgotten. This event, I think, is an especially important reminder of that. And we're so thankful to have Vince Warren here today to talk about some of the work he does and some of the work that CCR does in relation to the issues that we're here to discuss at this conference. I'm on the board of the Center for Constitutional Rights. I'm very proud to say that. CCR, and Vince will talk more about the work CCR has done over the years, but it is on the forefront of struggles for justice here in the US, from surveillance, from fighting police brutality, to even environmental issues, to Guantanamo Bay, to CMU's Communication Management Unit, really and issues that nobody else wants to touch. They're not only there litigating these issues in court, they're in the trenches with the communities who are affected. Vince Warren is one of the most dynamic civil rights leaders I've ever had the pleasure of meeting. He's the executive director of the Center for Constitutional Rights. He oversees CCR's groundbreaking litigation and advocacy work, which includes using international domestic law to hold corporations and government officials accountable for human rights abuses, challenging racial justice and LGBT injustice, combating abusive immigration policies and Muslim profiling, and stopping the illegal expansion of U.S. presidential power and policies such as illegal detention at Guantanamo Bay and torture. Prior to his tenure at CCR, Vince was a national senior staff attorney with the American Civil Liberties Union, where he litigated civil rights cases, focusing on affirmative action, racial profiling, and criminal justice reform. Vince was also involved in monitoring South Africa's historic Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings and worked as a criminal defense attorney for the Legal Aid Society in Brooklyn. He's a graduate of Haverford College and Rutgers School of Law. Vince is a frequent guest on MSNBC and Democracy Now! And is featured in numerous media outlets. He's a recipient of many awards, including the NYSBA Committee on Civil Rights 2016 Hayburn Burns Memorial Award, among others. Please join me in welcoming Vince Mourid.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. It's overwhelming to hear that bio, and I would know the one thing that I haven't done is won an Emmy Award, so. That's you. I'm working on that. I want to thank the Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms to invite me to speak with you all today. I want to tell you a little bit about myself, and then I want to tell you a little bit about the Center for Constitutional Rights. The thing that you need to know about me is that I am a lawyer, been a lawyer for about 30 years. What I really wish I was doing was playing jazz. I'm also a jazz musician, so if anybody can get me a jazz gig, hit me up. The other thing you need to know about me is that I'm in meetings all day long. And when I'm speaking with audiences, I don't like to feel like I'm in a meeting. So I might ask for a little call and response, and I might actually make it a little bit fiery here. So I don't want anybody to fall asleep, but I don't want anybody to be shocked if I really light it up. And I want to bring you greetings from the Center for Constitutional Rights. The Center for Constitutional Rights works with communities under threat, and we fight for justice and liberation through litigation, through advocacy, and through strategic communications. And since 1966, we have taken on oppressive systems of power, including structural racism, gender oppression, economic inequality, and racial and religious profiling. Too often, the law, which is what I work in, actually supports the systems of power that violate our most fundamental rights and prevent people from living in dignity. So we at CCR use aggressive legal strategies against the most virulent forms of oppression and push the law to meet the demands of justice. Our advocacy work complements litigation to build power where it's most needed amongst communities that have been pushed to the margins. We also use strategic communications to try to shift the dominant narratives that normalize these rights violations and increase public support, not just for our efforts, but for the efforts of our clients and the communities that we partner with. And we put this approach that I just talked to you about to the test over the last 17 years since 9/11. And why do we do that? Because fear and hatred that gripped this country at the time of 9/11 put justice and democracy to the test. Laila told you a little bit about Guantanamo. Here's what I'm going to tell you. That in January of 2002, the first 20 men were brought from abroad into Guantanamo, which is not in the United States, it's in Cuba, and they were put in isolation there. And George Bush, who was the president at the time, said these men will never see a court. The United Nations will not be able to have access to them. They will never have a lawyer. Nothing is going to happen. We're going to hold them until the quote-unquote war on terror is over. And 1 month after those men were brought to Guantanamo, we filed the first challenge to Guantanamo representing some of these 20 men. Now those 20 men grew from 20 to a total of almost 800 men that were left in Guantanamo. I'm happy to say that CCR, by pulling in other lawyers, people that had not worked in Muslim communities, people that had not done civil rights work, but these big fancy law firms, we pulled in over 600 lawyers, and then creating one of the largest mass lawyer movements in American history to represent these men, and we reduced the population from 800 in Guantanamo to today where there are about 40 men left. And we've also challenged the detention and illegal practices of creating prisons. In 2006 and 2008, the Federal Bureau of Prisons secretly created 2 experimental communications management units, also known as CMUs, which some of you are familiar with. And they isolated certain prisoners from the rest of the prison population and the outside world. Prisoners regulated to the CMUs have been sent there for years without meaningful explanation or procedural protections. They are banned from physical contact with family and friends, and their access to phone calls and to work and educational opportunities were extremely limited. Although the creation of these CMUs marked a dramatic change in Bureau of Prisons policy at the time, they were open without public notice. They were essentially open secretly. The only apparent reason for placement in a CMU has been retaliation against protected speech and religious practice that occurred in prison. 60% of those who were in CMUs were Muslim, although Muslims comprise only 6% of the federal prison population. As a result, the CMUs create stigmatizing ways that the normal process of administrative segregation, separating prisoners, doesn't work. We've also challenged restrictions on the way that prisoners and detainees are treated. Special administrative measures, also known as SAMs. Have any of you heard of those? Yeah. I know you have. When we think about unjust detention or torture or the so-called war on terror, we often think of the horrors of Guantanamo that I talked about, or the secret CIA sites where people were being tortured. But one form of domestic abuse, which has increased since 9/11 and is used routinely against Muslims prosecuted for terrorism, is a form of confinement known as SAMs. And these are communications restrictions that are imposed on top of solitary confinement, which result in even greater isolation. The decision to impose SAMs is made by the Attorney General, and the measures can be renewed annually and continuously for the duration of the prisoner's sentence. The punishment of SAMs can also be imposed pre-trial, meaning when defendants are considered or presumed to be innocent. And SAMs impose an additional gag on prisoner family members, defense lawyers, and expressly ban the media from communicating with affected prisoners, essentially preventing public scrutiny of the effects of near total isolation on human beings. In some ways, the communications restrictions are even far greater than those in Guantanamo because there's no process to review the information that creates prisoners being subject to SAMs. CCR for years worked with Fahad Hashmi and his family to draw attention to both the injustices of his conviction after a coerced plea agreement and the brutal conditions of his confinement, which included SAMs. After threats of litigation, the Justice Department moved Fahad's SAMs designation in 2011 and eventually transferred him out of the administrative segregation in Colorado to a CMU, which is less restrictive, but where, as I mentioned, we've also brought litigation. Last year, in partnership with Yale Law School, CCR released a path-breaking report in 2017 on this extreme and little-known form of isolation for most people. It's called The Darkest Corner: Special Administrative Measures and Extreme Isolation in the Federal Bureaus of Prisons, and is based on dozens of interviews with attorneys and family members with direct experience under SAMs, and is the first report that actually brings out the human and legal tolls of this harmful practice. As we note in the report, this unfettered discretion of the executive branch to impose SAMs, SAMs' potential for selective application against disfavored groups, and the walls of secrecy around those suffering under them are all the more concerning in the current political climate. The report was the subject of a detailed story in The Intercept and has also been cited in new legal challenges brought on behalf of prisoners currently under SAMs. Finally, I want to give you one more example of the work that we've done, and it's a case called Hassan versus City of New York. And this is where we've challenged the illegal surveillance of Muslims right here in the United States. In a Pulitzer Prize-winning series of stories released in 2011, the Associated Press revealed that after the 9/11 attacks, the New York City Police Department established a sprawling and secretive program, human mapping program, of suspicionless surveillance that targeted Muslim communities in New York, in New Jersey, in Connecticut. The Hassan case was the first case brought on behalf of Muslim Americans who were unlawfully targeted under this program. Now, the case specifically challenged the suspicionless surveillance of Muslims in New Jersey solely because of their Muslim identity. And in doing so, the Court of Appeals in that case issued a soaring and groundbreaking ruling that supported our case, and that said that the NYPD, the New York City Police Department, was acting unlawfully. And I'll tell you more about that ruling a little bit later. I've got good news. On April 5th of this year, CCR and our co-counsel announced that we had reached a far-reaching settlement in this lawsuit in which the NYPD agreed that it would not surveil Muslims in New Jersey on the basis of their religion or ethnicity, and that the New York City police investigations must always have a valid law enforcement purpose and enforce the Constitution. Now, they also agreed to publish policy guidelines governing their investigatory activity after we reviewed them and after our clients, members of the community, reviewed them. They also agreed to revise their training materials to avoid the use of stereotypes. And they also agreed to pay damages to businesses and mosques for the financial harm that the spying program caused. And finally, they agreed to pay damages for individuals for the dignitary harm caused by the stigma resulting from that discrimination. This was a huge settlement, but this marks the first time that the New York City Police Department has ever paid Muslim folks for anything with respect to the illegal activity that they were doing. So these are important pieces. This is part of the work that we're doing. We do international work. We do this, I think, groundbreaking legal work. But I have a question for you. Is this enough?
No.
Do you feel any safer right now after me telling you all that? Has it solved any of the problems that you or your families are having right now? No. And I think part of that reason is because, as I mentioned, the law sometimes doesn't get us where we need to be. We have to remember that we have to sometimes look beyond the law to ensure justice. What is legal is not always just, and what is just is not always legal. So what do we want? We want to live in an American society where we can grow, where we can thrive and participate and better ourselves without regard to our race, our religion, our gender, our background, who we choose to love, or what our political views are. That's the promise of this country. That's why we choose to be here. That's why we choose to stay here. But we also know that for many of us, the ability to live in basic dignity in our country often requires that we demand our basic rights more than it allows us to just passively expect them. This is the story of almost every single marginalized group in this country. Every group asks the same questions that you are asking. They ask, why are we being treated differently? Why will no one listen to us? Why, when we demonstrate that we're being treated differently, do they even, and challenge the powers, do they treat us even more harshly? Why do they criminalize us, our families, our houses of worship, our children, our entire community? Are we not part of this nation? Do we not have hopes and dreams for our families, our friends, and our neighbors? Do we not count? Does the Constitution not apply to us? How is this nation as a whole, how could it possibly be better off by vilifying and criminalizing so many of the communities that make up this country? After hearing and reading day after day for generations now that those of us who identify as black and brown, who identify as Muslim and Arab, after hearing that we are savages, that we are terrorists, that we are criminal, that we are disloyal, and we are dangerous, do we not start to believe that ourselves? Do we not begin to tell our children that there are people that are out there that will hate us because of how we look, because of how we pray, because of how we speak? Are we not just a little bit tempted to bend over backwards and to be a little bit more American? Do we keep silent about what we really think out of fear that our thoughts might be used as evidence against us in some trial somewhere? Do we not begin to start separating the good from the bad in our communities? To try to carve out a small, hopeful space that we, the good ones, should be treated better than the bad ones? Do we not hope for the day when there is one of us that's in power who understands and will change things for the better? That's not just the people in this room. It's not just this community. This is all oppressive communities that ask these questions and wrestle with these questions. And it's a trajectory that all of us that come from marginalized communities follow, whether we came here on an airplane, whether we crossed the northern border, whether we crossed the southern border, whether we came on an airliner, or whether we came by a slave ship. This is the same question that all marginalized communities ask. And it's a journey that we take because we are confounded. We are confused by the jarring disconnect between how a nation praises Americanness but yet excludes from us from all the virtues, all the benefits, and all the rights that Americanness is supposed to embody. This is true for the Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms family as it is for every single marginalized group in America. It happens to all of us. We ask the same questions. We seek the same answers. But yet, even so, and even though it might not feel like it at this moment, 229 years after the ratification of the US Constitution, we are making history. And we're making history because we have learned the important lesson of solidarity. And that lesson is when we work alone, we are vulnerable, and when we work together, we are invincible. We've learned that solidarity is a necessity because without it, we begin to believe the stories that they make up about us. And even worse than that, we begin to believe the stories that they make up about other marginalized groups. But working together is not easy. In fact, it's one of the hardest things that we do in social justice work. When we separate ourselves, we have to build bridges, and we have to work with other groups. And when we build bridges and work with other groups, we have to be there for them in order for them to be there for us. So let me tell you what happened after 9/11. You all remember this. 9/11 happened in 2010. Racial profiling was all about black folks. And in 2010, the black folks who were being beaten and racially profiled by the police were saying, where is everybody? Why are we alone? Where are all the Muslim and Arab people? 2011 happened, 9/11 happened, racial profiling shifted. All of a sudden, the black folks were nowhere to be found. And you were all asking, where are the black people? Where are the people that will stand with us as this is being done to us? And even right now, in 2018 in this country, there are people that are locked up in immigration detention right now. And they are saying, where are the black folks? Where are the Arab folks? Where are the Muslim folks? This is what solidarity looks like. But in the intervening years, we actually began to make history by building bridges between communities and confronting and dispelling stereotypes along the way and showing up for each other. I don't have to remind you when the Muslim ban was first announced. I don't know if you felt this way. I felt very depressed about the Muslim ban, no question about it, but there was something else too. Do you remember all those people that went to the airports? All of those people, some of you were probably saying, I cannot believe what I'm seeing. I don't know these people. They don't come to the mosque. They don't come to our community meetings. We don't go to the same school as their kids, but they are standing up for us. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people across this country had stood up because they knew that this was wrong. That is what solidarity looks like. And if you think that is not making history, you are mistaken. I want to give you another example. I talked to you about the Hassan case. This is the case about the New York City Police Department spying against Muslim communities in New Jersey. The Hassan case, we litigated that case, but we also brought together various groups to provide key briefs to get the court to understand what the issue was. The Muslim folks were saying the police are spying on us just because we're Muslim. The police were saying, and I may have to tell you what the police were saying. You know what they were saying. We were not spying on people because they're Muslim. We are spying on people because we want to make sure that they have no links to terrorism. There's nothing racially discriminatory about that. There's nothing religiously discriminatory about that. And we could not allow this court to take that at face value, because that is 100% not true. So one of the strategies we did was we connected with the Korematsu family. I'm going to take you all back to law school for a second. There was a series of cases called Korematsu that were challenging the Japanese internment camps that were here in this country during World War II. That case went up to the Supreme Court and lost The Supreme Court of the United States said it is perfectly fine and constitutional to keep people in Japanese internment camps in the United States who are American citizens because we are afraid that they might be allied with the enemy that we are fighting abroad. The Supreme Court of the United States says that was okay. But 50 years later, the courts and society began to say, you know, we might have made a mistake back then. So we partnered with the Korematsu family and we issued a brief to the court that actually put the Muslims profiling and the Muslim surveillance in the context of one of the greatest wrongs that this country has done, which was interning Japanese Americans. And do you know what happened when we did that? The court started thinking about the issue differently and issued this opinion that I had never seen before. I think it's probably one of the great opinions in the history of Muslim American civil rights. And the court said in this opinion, where the police department was saying, we are surveilling these people because we want to keep America safe, the court said the following thing. We said the same thing during the Red Scare in the 1920s with the Communist Party. We said the same thing with the Japanese Americans during World War II. We said the same thing with Black Americans during the Civil Rights Movement, and we're saying the same thing now. And then the court said, when are we going to see with foresight what we can now see so clearly in hindsight? Asking this question, are we going to make this mistake again? And we are at this foundational point in the nexus. We are right in the middle of hindsight and foresight. You all know the history. You know what is happening to your communities, and we are asking our society and our courts, are we going to let this happen again? Are we going to just see ourselves as part of the past, or are we going to see ourselves as part of the future? Are we going to let fear and hate and anger lead us to the destruction of our values, or are we going to let our values lead us to a place where we can live in dignity and respect? This is the historical question that we are confronting. And in my view, we have three options and three options only. Option number one is we can tell the history. Option number two is we can live the history. And option number three is we can make history. So let me tell you a little history. In the early morning of January 26, 1987, we're going back now. That's when I stopped listening to the radio, so I'm an 80s guy. Federal agents in Los Angeles burst into the homes of 8 people and arrested them. All 8 were pro-Palestinian activists, and because of the nature of the arrest, they assumed that they would be charged criminally with something. But they had no idea what, because they hadn't done anything wrong. And it turns out that the government didn't have any evidence at all that these people had done anything wrong. And the government announced publicly that it would not charge them with any crimes, but instead would deport them under the McCarran-Walter Act for providing material support to the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. We just run that back. No criminal charges, but we're going to deport these people. We're going to deport these folks for their political activity. These plaintiffs would be known as the LA 8, and this case, which CCR was proudly a part of, would go on for 20 years. The story of this case is legend, including the decades when it bounced around from lower courts to higher courts, and we were successful in getting the McCarran-Walter Act declared unconstitutional, only to have Congress replace it with the Immigration Act of 1990. The government took the position that these people were the worst of the worst, that they were terroristic agents of the day, but said that the information that would support the claim that they were the worst of the worst was what? Classified. 1987. Not only was it classified, they were not going to give that information over to the plaintiffs or their lawyers themselves. So as it turns out, we fought that battle and we ultimately won, and we got the information, and there was no information that these folks did anything criminal. After 20 years, the judge finally ended the deportation order, and at that point, the government's position 20 years later was, wow, we must have made a terrible mistake. But it took 20 years. So I'm telling you this story, and our clients, the LAA, lived this story. But let me tell you how we made history. During the case, a letter came to one of the lawyers. It was a plain manila envelope, no return address on it, and inside of the envelope was something that no one on the team, not even anybody at CCR, could believe. Inside the envelope, there was a 40-page memo that described a government contingency plan for rounding up thousands of legal alien residents from 8 countries: Libya, Iran, Syria, Lebanon, Tunisia, Algeria, and Jordan, and Morocco. The memo outlined that there would be emergency legal measures that would be put into place that include rescinding the right to bond, meaning that if you were arrested that you would not be able to get bonded out, keeping that the evidence the government had confidential, and excluding from public the deportation hearings, amongst other things. And most terrifyingly, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, which is the precursor to the Department of Homeland Security, had drawn up a contingency plan to intern Arab Americans at a camp at Oakdale, Louisiana, in the event of the U.S. war with Arab states. 1987. There was a meeting at the Department of Justice in September 17, and the Department of Justice established 4 working groups that had to develop the following mandates. Group number 1 had to develop the means and methods to prevent known terrorists from entering the United States. Group number 2 had to develop visa restrictions for aliens from certain countries or aliens of certain categories who are likely to be supportive of terrorist activities. Let me just pause there for a second. Does that sound anything to you like the current Muslim ban right now? 1987. Group number 3 had 2 things they needed to do. One is they were in charge of coming up with a plan for expulsion of the United States of alien activists who were not in conformity with their immigration status. And the other thing they had to do was to get rid of aliens that were engaged in support of terrorism while protecting classified information. The last group reviewed contingency plans for removal of selected aliens from the United States and sealing the borders. So if not for our case, which had nothing to do with that, fighting the case and pushing for the case actually generated somebody in the U.S. Government to leak the document about the plans that they had for us and for our people. This would have never come to light without the case. And I'm wondering, I can't help but wondering whether the history that we made by exposing that memo really is foreshadowing what we are dealing with now, 30 years later. We are at the nexus of hindsight and foresight. And the question is whether you're going to tell our history, whether you're going to live our history, or whether we're going to be ready to make history. And I think that we're poised to make history. And I want to tell another story. I'm going to take you even back farther, from 1987 to 1954. We're back in law school. There was a case called Brown versus Board of Education. Your kids have studied that in school. Brown versus Board of Education was the case that the Supreme Court said that black children and white children must be allowed to go to school together. In the United States and southern countries, in this particular state of Maryland, black and white children were not allowed to go to school together. Prince George's County was operating under a law that went back from 1872 that said black kids and white kids could not go to school together. And the Supreme Court said that's not allowed. That's unconstitutional. In 1954, Brown versus Board of Education, kids have to go to school together. Do you think that happened quickly? Didn't happen quickly at all. In fact, Prince George's County did not fully desegregate its schools until 20 years after Brown versus Board of Education. But in Louisiana, which was one of the toughest states that refused to desegregate, the people went to the courts and they finally got an order that this one public school had to be desegregated. And by desegregation, what I mean is that black kids and white kids have to go to school together, right? And in this one court case, they came up with an agreement that they would desegregate this all-white school by having one black child go to the school. One. So when the court said that, the white folks got very, very upset. They were picketing, they were protesting, and so now I learned a very important lesson when I was doing work in Ferguson. and watching people that were doing all of those protests against the police department, the thing that I learned is that you know that people are serious and that the issues are serious when people bring their children to demonstrations. Because as a parent, I'm a father of 3 sons, I know that it is equally important that your children experience and know what is happening even as you're trying to keep them safe from the horrible things that are going on. And so in Louisiana, one black child needs to get desegregated, and there's this woman by the name of Daisy Gabrielle. And Daisy Gabrielle says, my child is going into that school. And she brought her child, 6 years old in the 1st grade, through a gauntlet. People on all sides lined up in front of the schoolhouse, spitting, throwing, calling names at her and her child. But she felt it was important enough that she needed to bring her child to that school. So she went there and she was saying verses from the Bible as she walked up and was getting spit upon and spat upon and beaten and called names with her child. And she made it up to the top of the steps, and the reporters came up to her and said, "This was amazing. This was amazing. How is it that you defied everybody in your community to do this act?" And she said, "When it comes to my values and my community, my values will win every time." That's what she said in the 1950s. But I have something else to tell you about Daisy. Daisy was not the woman who was black that was bringing her black child to school. Daisy was a white woman. The entire community was boycotting the school, and she said, "No, my child is going to go to school with this black child." So she took her child through her entire community to prove that point, that the values are the most important thing. Daisy is someone that we don't know. Most of you have not heard about her. I've read about her in a couple of books. I've never met her. But that is the bravest thing that I can possibly think of. And it reminds me that bravery is actually not acting when you're not afraid. Bravery is acting when you are afraid. When you have something to lose. When you don't know how things are going to happen. Which brings me to making history. We cannot together make history without risk. We cannot make history without risk. There are many people that you deal with all the time, and you see them and they go to the mall and they're complaining about the prices and they're thinking about what they're going to make for dinner, and all you're thinking about is it's another day without my loved one. It's another day without somebody hearing what's happening. It's another day of me not knowing whether I should say something or not say something. But every time you say something, every time that you get together in a place like this, it is an act of sheer bravery. Sheer bravery. I think that we take risks, this community takes risks every single day. There is not a person in this room that does not send their child to school and prays to God that something bad won't happen. There's not a woman in this room wearing hijab, whether she's going to the gym or going to work or going to school, that is not taking a risk. This is bravery. And when I say to black folks, the people say, things are so terrible, Donald Trump is awful. He really is awful. This is awful, this is the worst that it's ever been. What are we going to do? And I say to black folks, we have been in this country for 400 years with some level of change put on us for every single one of those years, but we're still here. You are still here. Nobody's going anywhere. And the fact that you can survive and transcend some of the worst things that the government can throw against you, your family, and our communities is testament to why we're going to win. So here's what I want to leave you with. I want to leave you with risk. You take risks every day. And the question that we should be asking ourselves, the question you should be asking your communities, is how can we not take these risks given what is happening? We have to believe that justice is possible. The world is actually changing. There are so many more allies today than there were yesterday, that are here now than there were 10 years ago. There are young people amongst us who grew up not knowing a time before 9/11. People in this room do not remember what it was like before. They have no knowledge, and so they've grown up in the sense of lockdown and community, and they're ready to fight. Families have to make decisions about whether you're going to allow your children to fight. These are the conversations that are happening. It is no longer a situation where we can put our heads down and go to school and get great grades and get a good job and move forward because we're leaving something behind if we're not taking everybody with us. I want to thank you all for your bravery. I want to thank you all for the risks that you take. I want to tell you that there are organizations like the Center for Constitutional Rights and others that not only stand with you, but deeply admire what you're doing, and together we can work the law so that we can make justice and the law the same thing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Vince, for those beautiful, moving words. I think we all feel so honored and grateful for his presence. There's so much he could be doing on a Friday night, so many other audiences he could be speaking to, and yet he chose to be here to speak to us. This room may not be totally full, but I did a quick count. There's 60 people in here, and I don't think you can find a single room in the U.S. right now that has this concentration, this community of people who've been so affected by one thing, which is unjust post-9/11, war on terror cases. And in some way, just as we are honored to have Vince, I think this is really an opportunity for him to hear your voices, to hear your stories. And on that note, we'd like to hear from family members who've been directly affected. And I'd like to introduce Laila Yaghi. Laila Yaghi was born in Montana to an American mother and a Palestinian-American father. She grew up partly in the U.S. and partly in Amman, Jordan. She returned to the U.S. when she was 18. She has a bachelor's degree in applied science and a minor in business from Campbell University. She has two sons, Khalid, 35, and Ziad, who's 30. Her son Ziad is currently serving a 31-year sentence. He committed no violence, but was convicted of, quote, conspiring to provide material support to an unknown terrorist organization at an unknown time in an unspecified place. And with that, please join me in welcoming Laila Yaghi.
I'm just going to talk a little bit about my son and then I'm going to read a poem. So it started with my son wanted to go to learn some Arabic, and he wanted to see, his grandfather and his paternal grandfather and paternal grandmother in Jordan. So he went to visit there, and that's how everything started. They said that he went over there to commit an act of violence, jihad, and he went with his friend who's Egyptian, and they probably stayed, the first time he went by himself, and the next year he went with his friend, and they probably just stayed 1 week in Jordan, and then they went to Egypt, and they probably stayed 3 weeks in Egypt, and they had a lot of fun. They were at the beach and all the stuff, and also my son was trying to get married as well. So they came up with this long story. The FBI concocted the story that my son went overseas to commit an act of jihad, and that the word marriage is a code word for jihad as well as the beach. And then after he came back, about 2 years after him coming back, they arrested him with a group of people and said that they were conspiring to commit an act of violence somewhere in some country overseas, and they couldn't even name the country or the organization, that they supposedly belonged to. Anyhow, We thought that we were going to win the trial because there was no evidence against my son. So they were so good, you know, that trial they started talking about things that are happening in Palestine that had nothing to do with my son, and they're bringing people that were cutting off other people's head, and people wearing black and covering their faces and all that stuff. And they kept showing that to the jury over and over again, and they scared the jury at the beginning. And, you know, I was really upset with the jury and thinking how ignorant they are and how could they just convict innocent people. But then when I thought about it later on, I said, well, you know, they really scared the jury into thinking that these defendants are guilty, and that's why they convicted them. And they sentenced my son to 31 years, 5 years actually. And they fined him $8,000. So now even when we send money, they take from that money that we send him. Anyhow, I don't think I'm that good at talking, so I said, I wrote a poem, and I said, I'll read the poem and end it with that. For a long time, our laughter has not been from the bottom of our hearts. Our smiles are curved upside down, with eyes twinkling with tears about to drop. Our hearts are filled with wishes and hope that soon our loved ones will be home. Here we are to solicit some love, to vibrate our dying hearts, to mechanically pretend we are humans when we died, when they took our sons. We see a spider web, pretend it is a sign from God to ease our pain. There we go again. We throw our hands in the air. We catch on to one glimpse of hope. We pretend to be strong. We wake up at dawn, thinking of you, our beloved fathers, brothers, and sons. To me, we are all one. When our tears flow into the ocean, when the sun turns crimson from the dehydrated tears and the aching hearts, when the clouds cover our bodies like a blanket thrown on a couch, when no one knows how deep the pain is, we grab onto you. When our creatures are sleeping, not a sound except the breath of our sadness, glaring eyes peek through the darkness, trying to figure out how has this begun? When will it end? Then the sun decides to rise, taking its sweet time, inching little by little, as if to tease us. We lay waiting for your return on a bed that has gotten to know us, turning and tossing, fighting with our blankets, sweating pain out of every inch of our bodies. Then the day goes by with no meaning. The sun goes down like a yellow plate, and the night comes again, bringing pain with no medicine, and the bodies lie with eyes staring again through the darkness, as if the darkness will bring sweet dreams, will return the missing, will unfold and bring happiness. Somehow, someday soon, God's mercy will descend on us, and they will all come marching through the door. Our smiles will be curved upwards, and our hearts will learn to live somehow, someday soon.
Thank you so much for that, Laila. I can tell that was written really from the heart. Thank you for sharing. Next, I wanted to introduce Hawa Wehelie, another family member. She's an attorney and business consultant based in Washington, D.C. She works with a diverse clientele from startups and small businesses to multinational firms and government agencies. Hawa holds a JD and master's degree in business administration from Howard University, Since 2010, Hawa and her family have been directly impacted by the discriminatory policies and programs targeting Muslims. They have been placed on terrorist watch lists, face continuous harassment at the U.S. border, are under FBI surveillance, and most significantly, her younger brother, Yusuf, was a victim of entrapment by the U.S. government and was later given a harsh prison sentence of 10 years in July 2017 for the pretextual crime of possession of a firearm as a felon, a sentence 292% longer than the upper end of the federal sentencing guidelines. Please join me in welcoming Hawa Wehelie.
I could speak at great length about the injustices my family has experienced as a result of discriminatory policies and programs targeting Muslims since 9/11. Despite being born and bred in America, we're still subject to unwarranted FBI surveillance, placed on watch lists, harassment, and lengthy detentions at the border. But tonight, I want to share the story of the unfair and prejudicial prosecution of my brother Yusuf. This is the first time I'm speaking publicly about his case. I've yet to unpack the trauma of this experience as I continue to experience the trauma of state-sanctioned violence against my family. What happens when your government views your entire existence as a threat? When your identity now is a matter of national security? When your religiosity is somehow a measure of your propensity for violence, of your criminality, and now your body symbolizes the excess of political violence? What happens next? I know that we can no longer stay silent. I remember this beautiful quote from the author and anthropologist Zora Neale Hurston. If you're silent about your pain, they will kill you and say you enjoyed it. So I want to thank NCPCF for inviting me and encouraging me to speak tonight. Yusuf's case coincided, sorry, I'm like breathing heavy on it. Yusuf's case coincided with the birth of my legal career. I was sworn in as an attorney a month after his sentencing hearing. And I remember standing in the courtroom in New York State where I and every attorney and judge in this country took an oath to uphold the principles and the laws enshrined in the Constitution. Freedoms like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of association, of expression, your right to a fair trial. Yet, I knew in that moment that these principles and these laws in the Constitution don't apply. They don't apply to people like me. These notions of justice and equality before the law are not safeguards for my community. Rather, they are forms of oppression and humiliation. Yusuf's story begins in 2010, and I'll try to be brief, and I'm not going to include a lot of the details for the sake of time. But it begins in 2010 in Yemen, when Yusuf and our older brother Yahya were traveling back from Yemen, and were detained in Egypt, where we discovered that they were placed on the no-fly list. Yahya was detained in Egypt in limbo for 3 months. While Yusuf was able to return earlier than Yahya, he was held in an Egyptian jail where he was blindfolded, interrogated, and assaulted. Their case gained national coverage, and with the assistance of CARE, they were able to return home and eventually removed from the no-fly list. It's safe to assume that my family has been under close government watch since this ordeal in 2010. In December of 2015, Yusuf met a good practicing Muslim brother from Atlanta. He was a businessman. He invested in the masajid, in the mosque, in the community. This good brother turned out to be an undercover agent who sought my brother's conviction. From his first encounter with the agent in December of 2015 to his arrest in July of 2016, Yusuf was under daily and constant surveillance. Daily and constant surveillance. His phone was tapped, there was drones following him, there were cameras placed in the street lamp facing our home and along our street in our neighborhood. There was a FISA intercept inside of our home, recording private and intimate conversations, daily and constant surveillance. In February of 2016, the undercover agent who was posing as his friend offered to pay him to bring firearms from Baltimore to Virginia, and Yusuf agreed. He took the firearms from one undercover agent in Baltimore and dropped it off to another undercover agent in Springfield, Virginia. He was arrested 5 months after this incident, and he was charged with the possession of a firearm by a felon. This was his only charge. At the preliminary hearing, the government admitted that the firearm offense had nothing to do with terrorism and was indeed a crime of opportunity. At sentencing, however, the focus of my brother's case turned on statements that he made to the undercover agent on March 30th, 2016, during a 3-hour-long meeting, of which only 5 minutes of where he conjured hypotheticals of violence were emphasized, and the remaining 175 minutes were ignored. The prosecution in his case admitted that the statements were unrelated to the firearms offense, and that these statements would not support any crime whatsoever. It was not conspiracy, no material support, no terrorism charge at all. And the government's multi-year investigation from December until July, unearthed no evidence of terrorism whatsoever, and the prosecution deemed a 46-month sentence would be appropriate. At the sentencing hearing, the presiding judge, Bruce Lee, repeated the phrase, and it became a refrain throughout the proceeding: context matters. Context matters. Yet he ignored the very context of my brother's words. He ignored Yusuf's actions throughout this investigation, and he sentenced Yusuf to 120 months, a sentence nearly 3 times higher than the recommended guidelines. According to a recent report by the Institute of Social Policy and Understanding, Muslim defendants on average receive 4 times the sentence as their non-Muslim counterparts. For example, for the same crime, a Muslim defendant was sentenced to 211 months versus his non-Muslim counterpart who committed the same exact crime was sentenced to 53 months. The rationale behind this harsh sentencing is that these Muslims are more violent. They cannot be deterred or rehabilitated. They're uniquely dangerous. And this is not new. In the 80s and the 90s, similar accusations were made against young black men in the war on drugs, where young black men were described as remorseless super predators, and harsh sentences for low-level and non-violent drug offenses were imposed. Americans now realize that young black drug offenders were unfairly characterized, and which has eventually led to the reduction in the length of drug-related offenses, in the sentencing of drug-related offenses. Fears of Muslims as violent terrorists, radicals, extremists continue to dominate public discourse today. Politicians and judges are pressured to be tough on terrorism, and it is doubtful, at this moment, that they will institute reforms to reduce prison sentences for Muslims without a change in how American society views Muslims and views the war on terror at large. So, a lot of the families here today have suffered similar injustices that my family has suffered, and are painted with all the fervor and vilified and dehumanized in the media. And at times it seems very hopeless. Even for me, American-born, American-educated attorney, and I couldn't help my brother. But there is something that we can do. And I'm speaking to myself as much as I am speaking to you. And Vince mentioned this point earlier, but the importance of building community. In order for us to heal and move forward from this traumatic experiences, we need community. There is power in people, and there's power in numbers. And we need to get involved and support organizations like NCPCF and CARE and Muslim Legal Defense Fund, and CCR, who work tirelessly to fight for our humanity. And we must always make dua, as my father always told us, that the dua is the powerful weapon of the believer. And I want to take this moment to make a short dua. May Allah bless our caged and forgotten brothers, sons and fathers with the beauty of patience, the strength of faith, and the honor of wisdom. May Allah also bless and love our mothers and increase their patience and their strength, for they are also imprisoned. And may Allah grant ease and freedom to all political prisoners everywhere. And before I leave, I want to share a call and response that I learned back in undergrad by this amazing activist and mentor of mine, and it's inspired by the intro of Gil Scott-Heron's Winter in America. So if you would all please stand and hold hands with the person next to you. And repeat after me. Now. 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 More than ever. More than ever. All the brothers and sisters. All the brothers and sisters. Must come together. Must come together. All the brothers and sisters everywhere. All the brothers and sisters everywhere. Must feel that the time is in the air. Must feel that the time is in the air. Common blood flows. Common blood flows through common veins, and common eyes, all see the same. All see the same. Now, more than ever, all the brothers and sisters, must come together. All the brothers and sisters everywhere, must feel that the time is in the air. Common blood flows through common veins, and common eyes, all see the same. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Hawa. That was amazing. I wanted to also hear the voices tonight of two people who are not only intimately involved in the Coalition for Civil Freedoms, but who've also been clients of CCR as a way to bridge these two organizations and hear directly from people who've been represented by CCR and helped by CCR. And first up is Mariam Abu Ali. Mariam is the former program director at CCF. Born and raised in Northern Virginia, she graduated from Georgetown University with a major in government and minor in Arabic. Mariam's involvement in civil and human rights is very personal. She has been advocating on behalf of her brother, Ahmed Abu Ali, a victim of torture and extraordinary rendition, and a U.S. political prisoner for over a decade, sentenced to life in a solitary cell. As we think about Jamal Khashoggi, the journalist who was killed in Turkey, let us remember that Ahmed Abu Ali was actually tortured in Saudi Arabia, and that torture, that his comments or his statements made under torture were admitted in a U.S. courtroom. Please join me in welcoming Mariam Abu Ali.
Give you guys a little update. If some of you here were here last year, you may recall I shared the story of my brother Ahmed Abu Ali, who was a student at the University of Medina in Saudi Arabia, where he was studying Islamic studies. Ahmed was arrested by the Saudi authorities while he was taking a final exam, and he was tortured over the course of 3 days in Medina, and then transferred to Riyadh, where he continued to be interrogated and tortured for 47 days of interrogation. After that, Ahmed was forced to read a written statement that was videotaped, and that statement became the cornerstone of the U.S. prosecution against him. Despite the fact that Ahmed remained in Saudi custody without charges for 20 months, and during that time period, the FBI had made statements indicating that they had no interest in his detention, Ahmed remained in Saudi prison and was only brought back after we filed a habeas petition on his behalf. So after 2 years of illegal detention without charges, Ahmed was finally brought back only to face terrorism charges, where the only evidence was a confession tape. Ahmed was sentenced to 30 years in prison, and that was later, and then he was later resentenced to life. And since the beginning of his detention, he was held under SAM's special administrative measures, and he was in solitary confinement. So I want to talk about CCR and CCF and their roles in really empowering us as a family, and giving us the strength to continue fighting on his behalf. I've been coming to the family conferences for over 7 years, and I have been able to meet other families who've been impacted by the post-9/11 cases and sentences, and it's been an opportunity to share our stories and to find healing and empowerment and community and a place where we were free from the stigma and the questions that came along with our cases. And so for that, I'm very grateful, and I'm also especially grateful for CCR for taking interest in the case of Ahmed. They've worked on his case for some time now, and I'm happy to say that in March of this year, CCR was able to have the SAMs removed. So that was a huge victory for us. And honestly, it really felt like a miracle. I remember getting the phone call from the attorney Perdis from CCR, and I was in New York City, and she informed me that the DOJ had removed the SAMs. They decided not to renew them after we had worked on a lawsuit. And it felt like this huge burden was lifted, and I started crying. So for the first time in 15 years, Ahmed has finally been able to talk to family members who are not considered immediate family. He's been able to talk to his cousins, his aunts, his grandma. He's been able to receive letters from his friends and community members. And I can't tell you the impact that has had on my family. It really has been just such a huge, huge relief and a huge blessing. I mean, probably I would say the hardest part about his detention and his imprisonment was the SAM's measures, which really made it impossible for us to advocate on his behalf. It made it impossible for us to talk about his case. It limited us so much in what we were able to say about his circumstances and his mental health status and his just pretty much it was like a gag order on all parties involved. The attorney couldn't even talk to me about the details that she'd had in conversation with him, and I couldn't talk to the media. I couldn't even talk to my friends or extended family about the details of my conversations with Ahmed. So in a lot of ways, when people would ask me, who is Ahmed? And I could only talk about who Ahmed was, and I couldn't talk about who Ahmed is now, and I couldn't share the content of his letters, and I couldn't talk about I couldn't talk about who he was as a person now. And in a way, it was a way to make him disappear, and for the SAMs to no longer be for him to no longer be under SAMS is a huge victory, and I'm forever grateful for that. So thank you to CCR and CCF for their support and for their empowerment and for their solidarity and their bravery and for fighting for justice. Thank you.
Before I introduce our next speaker, I just want to say what an extraordinary thing it is to those of you family members who've chosen to speak out, as Mariam has for all these years, on behalf of your loved ones. It truly is a huge sacrifice. It truly is an act of courage, I think, at times when we feel under attack. And I just want to commend you for your courage and for speaking out. And for those of you who can't, I just want to say that's okay. We all know our limitations, and we don't all have to be spokespeople. We all provide support to our family members in whatever way we can. Next up, I want to introduce Sara Jayyousi, and just to kind of update you on Sara and the Jayyousi family. Sara actually just received an award from CCR last night in New York City, which is very exciting. So CCR has an annual event that recognizes change makers, artists, activists, and storytellers. And Sara was one of the recipients of the Changemaker Award this year, which is really exciting, because of her work as a poet, and also because of her advocacy on behalf of her father. Sara Jayyousi is a 22-year-old Detroit poet and Wayne State University graduate who has a story to tell, one that she's continuing to write each day that she lives. Her father, Kifah Jayyousi, a U.S. Navy veteran and former university professor, was unjustly profiled post-9/11 and convicted on charges fabricated by the government in 2004. He was sent to prison for 13 years under inhumane conditions as he served in the communications management units, nicknamed the Little Gitmos, that were created to house innocent Arab and Muslim Americans like Sara's father. Last year, her father's sentence ended and he came home. She embodies a story of what being a daughter of an innocent man in prison is like and how it continues to negatively affect her and her family's lives today. Sara.
It is March 2005. I am 9 years old and my father has just been arrested for a crime he did not commit. My father, after serving in the U.S. Navy, volunteers on weekends to assist various charity organizations that the U.S. government sponsored to provide relief for innocent civilians of the Bosnian and Chechen War. This was back in 94 to 96. He collects, sorts, and sends food, medicine, and clothing. The government says he sent those supplies to aid the enemy, to help terrorists. He was charged and convicted with conspiracy to commit terrorism. At 9 years old, my two sisters, mother and I, are forced to move to Miami, Florida, where my father is held in solitary confinement as the trial unfolds. For years, the government tried to recruit him to work with them against the Muslim community, but he refused. So they threatened to come after him anytime, anywhere in the world he goes. As he is held in the SHU, the government continues to try to recruit him and he continues to say no. I turned 10 that November and I'm in courtrooms watching as my father is made into the enemy. 2006 and I'm 10. I've become familiar with the smell of a courthouse, with cruelty they paint my dad in. The solitary confinement building he's held in is in downtown Miami. My sister's mom and I draw pictures in chalk on the sidewalk for him. We can't see him amid the dozens of windows, but spend hours in the sun with chalk-covered hands, trying to tell my dad we love him. 2007, I'm almost 11. The jury finds my father guilty. My mom comes home carrying his suitcase. Everyone's eyes are red for a week. The judge sentenced him to almost 13 years, and she recommends a low-security prison. That's not what ends up happening. 2008, I'm 11. We moved back to Detroit after my father was secretly moved to a high-security, hidden, illegal prison called the CMU, or the Communication Management Unit, in Terre Haute, Indiana. The government made it to put Muslim prisoners in so they can separate them and monitor them, as well as pressure them to work with the FBI and CIA against other Muslims. It's nicknamed Guantanamo North, or Little Gitmos. In the CMU, we only get 4 hours of visiting a month, as well as 15-minute phone calls a week. We combine the end and beginnings of months to make the visits 8 hours over a 3-day period. The visits are expensive, and we drive there. The visiting room is hell. It is small and seems to only get smaller. Worst of all, right down the middle of a room is a plexiglass window separating us from him. We only have 2 static-filled telephones to hear him better. He grips the phone on his side. He's not allowed to put it down during the entire visit. We develop a way to touch my dad through the glass. He places one hand on his side, and we place a hand over his on our side. I pretend I feel the glass get warmer. A large steel door is locked behind us. We cannot hug or smell my dad. We cannot touch him. He's there for 3 years. 2010, I'm 14 and starting to have trouble sleeping at night. They say they've moved my father. We think it's closer to Detroit, but it is farther. They sent him to another CMU in Marion, Illinois. The rules are all the same, but the visiting is worse. We're led into the visiting building with other families, other children, but then we're separated. We pass inmates with swastika tattoos. We pass rapists, murderers, with their families sitting in chairs right next to them, holding their hands, sitting in their laps. We pass them and we're led into an indescribably torturous room. The plexiglass window is here too, and it's dirty with smudges. We would clean the glass ourselves with wet tissues, just to be able to see my dad clear. We leave only our handprints on the glass at the end of the visit. The steel door here is left open, but the noise of the dozens of visitors outside makes it difficult to hear anything, even with the sticky black telephones pressed to our ears and a hand over our other earlobe. We can't breathe if we close the door shut. We can't breathe anyways. My dad spends another 3 years there. I am 11, 12, 13, 14. I'm 15, 16, 17, and I never get to hug my own father. We ask them on holidays for just a quick hug, and they say it's a security issue. For 6 years, I see other children who get to sit with their fathers. I imagine them smelling their shirts to hang on to their father's cologne. Imagine them closing their palms tight to remember the feel of their father's skin. 2014, I'm 18. My father has moved to general population, where we finally get to have contact visits. I hug my father for the first time after 6 years and can't stop shaking the entire day. It makes me angry because he's still innocent and we're still surrounded by cameras, keys, guards, and metal bars. My little sister looks like she might cry once, so I buy a box of raisins from the vending machine and stick them in between my teeth, giving her the biggest smile. She laughs, even some of the guards laugh. Everyone laughs, but I just want to scream. I want to take my dad home with us. 2017, I'm 21. My father is released into a halfway house and then sent home after serving the entire 13 years for a crime he didn't commit. He's also given 20 years of probation, restricted to remain in the Eastern District of Michigan. Even with his PhD, it takes months for my dad to find a job in his profession because no one's going to hire a convict. Everything's upside down, we all say sorry too much. My father, Sara Jayyousi, is a PhD degree-holding man, was a professor at Wayne State University, chief facilities director for both DC and Detroit public schools, and is a U.S. Navy veteran. None of this matters because he's also a Muslim American man in a post-9/11 world, where any Middle Eastern can be targeted and profiled by the U.S. government. They're torn away from their families, accomplishments, everything they've built up as U.S. citizens, given false fabricated charges simply because of their religion. Throughout this ordeal, my mother held our family together, and we've held on to our values that the government put on trial, attacked, and wanted us to abandon. Our survival solely depended on our unrelenting patience and strong faith. We faced injustice with unwavering perseverance. Upon his release, the State of Michigan Board of Professional Engineers unanimously voted to renew my father's engineering license, rejecting his conviction. He's now working for a prominent Michigan construction company who also rejected the conviction. 2018, I'm 22 and standing in front of you. I still hear the guard's keys, still smell the metal, still feel the plexiglass against the palm of my hands. Our lives are still wrapped in bars, and our skin is still being bitten into by the barbed wire we can never shake off. None of us ever left prison, but they will never break us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sara. I think so many of us, I'm trying to keep it together, but I think so many of us in this room can really relate to that and to that experience, even all these years later. I'm not sure if I ever introduced my own husband before, but I guess there's a first time for everything. As we were driving over here, it occurred to me, it used to be, especially shortly after my father's arrest, as I was traveling the country kind of speaking about his case, I always used to look at life as, two different periods, before he was arrested and after, and obviously how drastically things changed after. And I realized today that I've actually been married to my husband for nearly as long as, or maybe even longer, the number of years than it was after my dad's arrest and before I met him. And we were just talking about how getting older and the passage of time really sort of warps your own perception of time. But I think joining our family, he's really understood and has been able to learn firsthand what it's like to go through an experience like this. And we wanted him to come tonight and to speak from the perspective of a Muslim scholar, and to give some words about the concept of justice in Islam and the importance of speaking out and defending those who've been unjustly accused. Jonathan Brown is the Walid bin Talal Chair of Islamic Civilization in the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University, and he's the director of the Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding. He received his BA in History from Georgetown in 2000 and his doctorate in Near Eastern Language and Civilizations from the University of Chicago in 2006. His most recent book, Misquoting Muhammad, The Challenges and Choices of Interpreting the Prophet's Legacy, was named one of the top books on religion in 2014 by The Independent.
Risk of upsetting my wife, I'm actually not going to talk about any of that. I had originally a really good joke, but I feel just terrible now. I was going to say that they brought me because it was otherwise going to be an all non-white male panel. That's a pretty good joke. Anyway, it's. I guess I would actually say that. The reason I'm here speaking is because I'm actually kind of like your target audience. People sometimes who meet me here and they say, "Oh, Professor Brown, you really have such good politics, so courageous," and that's just complete, horseradish. I remember one of the first discussions I had with Laila's dad. It was about, I was saying Ronald Reagan was the greatest president. He was didn't agree with me on that. I think we were already married. Otherwise, maybe he wouldn't have agreed to marry her. But my point is that, if you told me, let's say when we got married in 2010, if you told me in 2010 all the stuff that you've heard today, I just wouldn't have believed you. I would say, no, this is the United States. That's like other, Saudi consulate, whatever, other countries, they do this stuff. It doesn't happen here. We don't have it. Stuff doesn't happen here. And when you realize it does happen here, it really pisses people off. I mean, it really, very quickly outrages people when they really get what's happening. Right? When you really, and they don't understand. It doesn't take long for someone to start seeing things differently. And a lot of times whenever I hear these testimonies or think about a lot of my family, I usually just feel a lot of shame because when Laila's dad was arrested, I don't know if I think I've told you this before, but if not, it'll be an interesting evening. When he was arrested, one of my friends, another Muslim guy, he's in law school, and we were talking about the case, and this is long before I knew Laila. He said, I read the charges, he's definitely guilty, And it wasn't until I talked to Laila's dad and understood how the government works that the stuff they say you did when they announced your indictment is not even they think you did that. They know they can't prove this stuff. They'll say, he ate 5 babies and punched 10 homeless people and killed 50 puppies and did all this stuff. And they know it's not true, it doesn't matter. They just superseded another indictment. But they just put this out there in the media, and what people do, they just accept it. I just accepted it. My lawyer friend just accepted it. And when I realized how this works, it's actually really liberating, because I just don't believe anything the government says about people. At all. And by the way, that's your constitutional common law obligation as well, because it's their obligation to prove someone's guilty, not your obligation to believe the government when they say something about somebody. Right? I actually am optimistic, very optimistic, because, until, when was the Ferguson thing, like 2014? This is really embarrassing. If you told me in 2014, that the police in America just shoot young black men for no reason, I was like, no, that's not true, it's ridiculous. No, I'm sure they did something wrong, obviously you're a criminal or something. I mean, you would just shoot somebody for no reason. That doesn't happen in this country, it happens in other countries. And I think it was maybe after the 20th video or whatever that happening, I realized, actually this does happen, right? And mind you, I'm Muslim, I've been Muslim for over 20 years or something, and family, my family is Laila's family, so I know about, it's not like I'm unaware of this stuff. But I didn't understand what happened to young black men until I saw God knows how many of these videos. Now, the reason why it makes me optimistic is because all you need to do is to have people be skeptical of their government, which is, by the way, exactly what Americans are supposed to do. I mean, we don't have to read much about the American Revolution, the Constitution, everything, to realize that questioning the right of others to hold authority over us and to have the government have their way with us is, part of American political rights. So a lot of times, I think this one scholar, Aaron Kanani, he wrote, that the war on Muslim civil liberties, not on civil liberties, the war on Muslim civil liberties in America was started by George W. Bush. It was made legal by Barack Obama, but I'm actually very optimistic that it's going to sort of peak and then start on its downslope under Donald Trump. Because, when you were during Obama years, God knows what it was like during the Bush time. During Obama years, I always felt really stressed out about my father-in-law, Laila's name, the fact that there's all these FBI cars sitting outside our house all the time, running their stupid engines constantly, like me shoveling snow or mowing the lawn next to them. But I always felt this was, I felt ashamed by this and nervous, and now, this is just kind of gives me street cred. This is the kind of stuff, this is like the currency of resistance in Trump's America. Now people believe you when you say somebody got killed for no reason. People believe you when you say this person was targeted by unfair government policies. People go to the airport when they hear about this Muslim ban, right? This is a big difference, and it's sort of unfortunate that it has to happen because our president's like a xenophobic ass. But that's one of the upsides of this is that anybody who doesn't like the Trump administration is very happy now to listen to Muslims in a way that they wouldn't have before. So now is the time that we really need to try and communicate to all the other Jonathan Browns out there and Jonathan what's the female version of me or whatever, communicate to them. Communicate to them what we have to say, what someone like me has learned about how it's time now to really try and maybe turn back the clock or dial back a lot of these measures and to release some of these people from the insanely unfair and unjust and totally baseless sentences that they've received. Does that come up with it?
Thank you for that. So I just introduced my husband, and now I'm going to introduce my brother from another mother, Ahmed Bedier. Ahmed Bedier has worked for the past decade as a community organizer, radio show host, human rights advocate, television commentator, and interfaith leader. Bedier is the founder of United Voices of America, president of the Human Rights Council of Tampa Bay, and serves on the state board of the ACLU of Florida. His organization offers programs and training to enable and facilitate minority participation in all aspects of government and the political process, and he's a friend of CCF. He was here last year. He gave a great presentation. He'll be giving a presentation tomorrow as well. So let's help me welcome him and also thank him for his commitment to CCF.
Thank you, Laila. Let's give Laila a big round of applause. Emmy Award-winning Laila. Congratulations again. And apparently tomorrow she's getting another award, the Excellence in Media Award at the Care Break. So, I came to this conference. This is my third time attending this conference. I did come last year and I gave a presentation. And every time I come, on one hand, it's sad to hear the stories. We shouldn't have this conference. If we lived in a perfect world, there wouldn't be a need for CCF. There wouldn't be a need for the support group. There wouldn't be a need for the families of the forgotten. But the reality is we live in America. And America does have this history of mistreating different segments of their populations at different times. It's happened to people before us, and it's happening us now. And for the most part, it's been people of color. So there's a stain on our American history. When people talk about American exceptionalism, they neglect to mention all the atrocities of how America treated its most vulnerable people. And we continue when we see the racial disparities and racial inequalities and issues dealing with racial injustice. It's what we inherited from our past of slavery and just mistreating non-whites. And I know it's been mentioned that we live in a challenging time under President Trump, but it's also been mentioned it's a time of opportunity. We heard about the Muslim ban and how all these people flock to the airports. Had that Muslim ban happened under Obama, people would not be going to the airports. The people didn't have a change of heart about Muslims, the people had a change in heart about Trump. So they're anti-Trump more than pro-Muslim. They're not Muslim-loving white liberals. They're just Trump-hating white liberals. And so the reality is our condition and the issues and the cause that we're advocating for is not going to change based on who's in the White House. It's not going to change because of Trump or Obama or Hillary or even Bernie Sanders, who I admire. And I was a delegate for at the Democratic National Convention. But even if he was in office, things would not change for our community. Why? Because people will never change our condition, just like the Quran says. And I'm not the scholar, Jonathan Brown is, and he didn't mention the scholarship. But just this part about that God promises in the Quran, it's like a law in our faith that says God will never change the condition of a people until they change themselves. The reality that we're living today is not, a lot of it has to do because of our own community. Things have not changed for the black community because white people decided, hey, we're just being mean to you and let's just give you your rights, right? They had to go fight for their rights. They had to demand their rights. And sure, some white people joined, but they had to start it. Nobody did it for them. They had to have leaders like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and the Black Panthers and others. Some of them were more radical than others. But a combination of that brought some progress. But even despite all of that, you can still see the injustice that's happening today, where black people are getting murdered on the streets by police officers. You're not talking about, by the KKK. Some of these people that used to be in the KKK just put on police uniforms and started using their badges to kill black people, but they're still accomplishing the same thing. Not to say and generalize that all police officers are bad, but there are definitely a lot of racists that are joining these police forces so they can legalize their killings and brutality against black people. And we're seeing it. We're seeing it not because we have cameras, we have phones. It's being documented. It's always been happening. We just didn't believe it. People, American white liberals, are not getting serious about gun violence because gun violence didn't exist before, but now because white kids are getting killed, so they're getting serious about it. When it starts impacting their own selves is when they start waking up, and because it's happening to Muslims, they don't care. But what's even worse is when Muslims don't care themselves. So when we talk about forgotten, it's not because the major society, the majority, and the white people just forgot about these families and these people in cages. It's because the Muslims themselves have forgotten about them, and if the Muslims don't care about these families and these cases, then how do we expect the rest of society to care? And for law enforcement, for the FBI, we're sitting ducks. We're easy scapegoats. You can go after these people and they won't fight back. They'll just cave in. We'll put so many resources against them, and they don't have the money, and they have to cut a plea. And when they cut a plea, they win. And they turn a normal case of whether it's whatever it may be, they add terrorism enhancements, and all of a sudden they have another terrorism case that they scored. So they can justify their big budgets when they go in front of Congress and say, look at the hundreds of terrorism cases and terrorists that we stopped. Without mentioning, of course, that half of them were fabricated, or more than half of them were fabricated by them in made-for-TV type scenarios, like we saw in Albany, and we see in the Brooklyn, Miami, all over this country. Vulnerable individuals, many of them have mental illnesses or weak people, are getting entrapped left and right with fake plots. And when they find vulnerable people, instead of bringing them back to sanity, they push them over the edge to become insane, where they put them under scrutiny and they monitor them around the clock, and they know their vulnerabilities. They're spying on them. They know where their weaknesses are. They know where they're hurting, and all of a sudden, the informant that shows up has the solution to all their problems. Whether it's a money issue, whether it's a family member that's sick, whether it's this or that, maybe it's a drug issue, and they start giving them the drugs. Or they give them what they need, and all of a sudden they gain their trust. And at that point, some of these people, like the Liberty 7 in Miami, were giving allegiances to Al-Qaeda for $50,000 each when none of them were Muslim. One of the lawyers told me that when she went to see them and said, do you want us to make a comment? How are they taking care of your religious accommodations in here? Can we get you a Quran, a prayer rug? And he's like, Quran? I'm Christian. It's like, what? They call you a jihadi that you're loyal to Al-Qaeda. Like, I was just saying that to get the $50,000. And for some of these people that were in the inner city in the Liberty 7 situation, they were just trying to clean up their hood. They thought there was a lot of gangs and they had to kind of be militant and radical and just, kind of like protect the neighborhood kind of people. And these people preyed on them. And they end up, in the first time they were, they couldn't convict them, and they had a second shot and they convicted them. look at these cases, and as soon as somebody's arrested in the Muslim community and the Muslim community runs as the first to run, that's the problem. When you go to these cases and the courtroom is empty and there are no Muslims there watching, the judge could do whatever they want. Well, these people don't have anyone backing them up, so why should I care? Nobody's watching me. Earlier this year, or last year, I got a phone call from an attorney that says I have a client that has a big trial coming up. There's a lot of misinformation about the case in the local media and around the country. And we need some help to dispel some of this misinformation, because the FBI has been lying and leaking information that's false to incriminate our client. And who's the client? It was the wife of the Orlando shooter. One of the worst mass killings in American histories on a gay nightclub in Orlando. We heard about it, the Post nightclub, and I live in Florida. Of course, when I got this phone call, of course, there was some reluctance. You know, I don't want to be associated with this case. You know, who's going to go and try to get involved in this? Even if I believe she's innocent, obviously there are consequences to stepping up and putting your neck out there. And I don't know this person, I don't know this woman. But the more I learned about it, the more I, discovered that they, did her wrong. And of course, the lawyers and CCF, appealed to my emotions, because, they're good at that, and my values and principles. And I did get involved in it to try to change some of the narrative that was happening locally, because we've heard all these things. We heard that the guy was gay. We heard that he was having, he had frequented this nightclub. We heard that they had gone there together, him and his wife, to scope out the club before they did this mass shooting. That he wanted to punish these people for being gay, for ISIS and other things. All of these things turned out to be false, that they weren't being reported in the media, because the only side that was leaking information was the FBI. The family didn't have any way to leak anything. And the family was just one woman. But what she did and what her defense team did is a textbook example of what we should all do when the government comes after us. One, don't cave in and don't admit guilt when you did nothing wrong. And that was the first step. And second, make sure you have a good legal team. You don't accept these public defenders. Many of them are good, but they don't have the resources, or they don't have the expertise. Because, in the American justice system is not equality. It's not just a fair fight. The American justice system is like two boxers in a boxing ring with a referee. The judge is a referee. So, would you go up into a fight against Habib? Or, McGregor, O'Connor, McGregor, you don't have the skills, and you just never even went in the courtroom before. You have to have the best fighter that can go head to head with the prosecutors. And for that, you're not going to get these guys for cheap. Right? If you want to go against the government, you have to have like the King James or LeBron James on your courts. Somebody that can dunk on them every day. And at the end defeat them, because the judge is not going to break in and say, hey, wait a minute, guys, you prosecute, you're playing dirty, right? They'll get away with it as long as the other side can check them. So in this situation, the prosecutors were playing really dirty. And they had a confession. Fortunately, it was a confession that was made to the FBI and not to the Saudis. Because the confession made to the FBI, there's some, you can at least have a chance to fight back. As unfortunately we learned with the Jamal, the Saudis play by different rules. And sadly, it's a shame that these Saudis call themselves Muslim. If I had a situation where I want to be on trial, I would choose this in Trump's America 1,000 times before I ever trust, Mohammed bin Salman, Saudi Arabia. I don't care if he's a custodian or they're the custodians of the Holy Mosque, no way. And that's the reality that we live in now. Just because somebody has a Muslim label does not mean you're going to be safe. So back to Noor Salman. They had a confession. She wrote a confession within hours of the murder of these people that she assisted her husband in, this plan to kill these people. And they took months after it, and the thing that struck me was, even though she gave this confession, they let her walk free. She just admitted that she was an accomplice in this crime. Why would you let her go? And they let her go for 7 months. In fact, they allowed her to move from Florida to California. That's suspicious. It wasn't until in the final days of the Obama administration, 2 days before the inauguration of Trump, that they arrest her. And they put her in solitary confinement for months and charged her with being aiding and abetting, basically the exact same crime as if she shot all those people. What we found out later is that the FBI had lied. That the handwritten confession was written in the hands of the FBI agent, that she was never given rights to a lawyer. And in fact, it was after a lot of pressure. And the FBI found out within days of that confession that half the confession was false based on forensic evidence. For example, in the confession, she said she and her husband drove by the nightclub. Well, the forensic evidence of the cell phones, because the cell phones, you have the cell phone data, which they pulled all the cell phone data, they didn't put her anywhere near the nightclub ever. In fact, neither of them have ever been near that nightclub ever before. Well, we found out in trial that he didn't even know the Post nightclub ever existed. That he shows the Post nightclub minutes before he showed up and started shooting people, and it was his third target that night. After the first 2 targets that he went to, he failed to get in because they had heavy security, where the Post nightclub had almost no security, so it was easy for him to get in. How do we know that? Because of his GPS and the commands he put on his cell phone. In his cell phone, when he first tried to go to Disney and tried to do the shooting there, the Disney cameras showed this guy going around and trying to get in. And there's heavy police presence, so he left. He waited around Disney for a couple of hours, eventually left. What did he do when he went back to his car in the parking lot of Disney? He Googled downtown nightclubs. He didn't Google Post nightclub. He didn't Google gay nightclubs. He Googled downtown nightclubs. The first one that came up was Club Eve, which is in downtown Orlando. He drove by Club Eve. A lot of people there. It was packed, but there's a lot of police outside. He couldn't walk in with his weapons. So he again went back to his car and Googled nightclubs again. The second option on there was Post nightclub. He started driving towards Post. The GPS shows you exactly where he goes. They showed this all in trial. But in order to defend yourself, you have to have the team and the money to be able to hire these experts to be able to, do the forensic evidence on the phones. If you don't have the money, you can't do it. You can't prove your innocence. He went by the Post nightclub, and guess what? He had a change of heart. He started going back to Club Eve. Then he Googled again for directions to Post. He went back to Post. He parked on the side, walked in with all his weapons. The guy at the door asked the guy at the door, to show you as proof that he did not know that this is a gay club. He asked the guy at the door, "Where are all the girls? Where are all the girls?" This guy was not gay. They showed that his, what is that website called? Plenty of Fish website account. He was only having sex with women, even though he was married. So there was no gay activity, but they wanted to just put this out there that this guy was somehow conflicted gay person. Why? At the end, what we discovered was, and this was a bombshell in the trial, that his father had been an informant for the FBI for like the past 15 years. His own father was on the FBI payroll for so many years. We know this because the FBI agent that was handling his father took the stand and testified to that. And he even went further to say, when I interviewed the young man, because he got in trouble with the law before, and his father intervened and got him out of trouble. In fact, on the second interview, the father showed up at the interview. And he was harassing the FBI, "Why are you going after my son?" And they asked the guy, "Why did you meet with him, Omar Mateen, a third time?" He said, "Because I wanted to develop Omar Mateen as an informant for the FBI." This FBI agent on the stand testified that he wanted to recruit this mass shooter as an FBI informant for the FBI. So who failed here? It wasn't Noor Salman, it was the FBI. They failed to protect the Orlando community. They failed to protect these gay people. Had they followed the signs when this person had made threats in the past and not get him off the hook because his own father was an informant for them, then those people may be alive today. They're the ones that are at fault. And they should be held accountable. And people should get fired. And for lying and creating and wasting so many, but nobody got in trouble for it. But what did happen is the jury in the Middle District of Florida saw through their lies and said that she was not guilty. And today, because of the stand that she took, Noor Salman is free. We say this because it's important that one, you don't give in. And two, you have to rally support. And make sure that your friends, Muslim and others, are there. And you challenge the government narrative. And we're not going to be afraid of them. In America, we still have some rights. They're counting on our fear. They're counting that we're not going to show up. And I remember just going to trial. The first couple of days, I was the only Muslim there. And Mel Underbaki. Mel, are you Muslim? No, you're not Muslim. I have questions about you. I think you might be in the closet Muslim. She's hanging out with Muslims all the time. Ashley, we're not sure about you either. We'll take the shahada after this, okay? But, you know, God bless her. Mel was there holding the sign that's outside, fair trial, just like she was outside for the Emmy Award case. And with all these terrorism trials, I think there was like, since 9/11, there's been like 3 or 4 wins. 2 of them, or 3 of them came from the Middle District of Florida where I live. So if you want to get in trouble, get on trial, go to the Middle District of Florida. Let's give our district a round of applause. Defeated the government narrative 3 times. But a lot of it is based on the community relations we have built with people who are not just Muslim, but people on the, who are also from the other faith community that are standing up. We went and visited church leaders. We went and even visited the gay community. We went to the and they were uncomfortable with our conversation when we started to say things like, he was not targeting gay people. That was difficult for some of them to hear. Because for months, there was so much emphasis on what happened, the biggest attack on gays in America. And many of them didn't want to, they shut the door in our face, some of them. But when the stuff started coming out, they knew we were telling the truth. We went and visited faith leaders in the community, and they wrote some op-eds to say, you know what, let's not rush to judgment. So you have to mobilize. If you're going up against the most powerful government in the world and they're going after you, you can't just sit idle and make dua. You got to work hard and then go make dua. So we have to show up. We have to make sure that the rest of the community is not afraid. The narrative and things will change when we empower ourselves, one in the courts and politically. When we have strong political relations, we should demand from our senators to ask the hard questions of the FBI. Why are you continuing to do these things? They may not listen to us, but they care about their budgets from members of Congress. Just like we're going to go on Monday and talk to members of Congress. That's very important. And you don't let them off, and you keep going back and telling your stories to these people. You get their business cards, and you build relationships with them. Let them internalize and understand where you're coming from. And then things will start changing. So, let's work together to make sure this happens. Have a great weekend. You're going to learn a lot. And let's push back against these politics of fear and the scapegoating and the persecution that's happening within the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Ahmed. I think it was really important to hear about the Noor Salman case and to hear what can happen when a community mobilizes, not just, as Ahmed mentioned, by raising money, making sure that Noor Salman had good lawyers, but also having a media campaign, which was led by CCF and especially Lina, having a community campaign, community activism, Ahmed and Mel, what they did, showing up and really being present. So all of that, I think, was really instructive for us as an audience. Please join me in thanking all of the speakers once again, everyone who participated.